of the vote, with 20% of the vote, a margin of 20% just last night.
You know, Simone, one way to look at this is that this was a quest, this election last night, a quest on Trump's part for redemption, right? He believes he was robbed of the 2020 election. And I think maybe on Biden's part, it was a quest for relevancy. They have a big loss last night, and Democrats and Joe Biden have a tough couple of years sledding ahead. Where do you see this? How does this set or reset expectations for the next couple of years?
So, look, I think what happened last night, in my opinion, tracks closely, and there's no Democrat in America that's going to tell you, yeah, we thought we were going to be neck and neck with one seat in the House. No. That's not what was happening. But it does track closely the old large trend with what what's happening on the ground. You've got Roe, the Dobbs decision, a very animating factor. You have the record pieces of legislation passed by this Congress at the helm of this president, the infrastructure bill, gun legislation, again, trying to get things done. We've been talking about the economy. Democrats across the country were talking about the economy on the campaign trail. They were not, frankly, doing in many places everything they need to do on crime, but it looks like crime was overhyped, okay, in these races across the country. And so Joe Biden went out there on the campaign trail. He campaigned in places that made sense, and where he went, Democrats did well. So I think that there are a lot of people that are just ready to count the president out, saying that, you know, he is, in fact, to your point, the relevancy point is something that I was hearing from folks. Joe Biden is very relevant. He is the president of a party that got vaccines for Americans, that passed record numbers of legislation, and now he is going to this COP26 very emboldened. Okay, he's leaving this state, this country emboldened, and I think in a way better position than anyone could have imagined coming into this morning.
So let's talk about a critical area, John. What's the latest on the ground there in Nevada?
Well, there are a lot of ballots still out there, Jose, and that's the issue. Catherine Cortez Masto, the incumbent Democratic senator, is behind Adam Laxalt, the former Republican Attorney General, by about 23,000 votes. Now, that's 23,000 votes out of about 800,000 plus that have been cast, and it's known that there are a lot of mail ballots that are out there, especially in Clark County, which is where Las Vegas is. It may be as many as 100,000 mail ballots, and Democrats have done very well in mail balloting. There are also at least 20,000 or so out in Washoe County, which is where Reno is. The Democrats have done well up there. So they're very, very optimistic about that Senate seat. Don't forget, in the race for the House, there were 3 House seats here held by Democrats that the Republicans thought that they could flip. It looks like all 3 are going to remain in Democratic hands.
And John, what about the timing? How long is this going to take?
Well, I think we're all going to be a little bit older, Jose, maybe a lot older by the time this ends. Here's what the state law says. The state law says they have to count any mail ballots that come in that have been postmarked on Election Day or before by Saturday at 5 p.m. So they're going to start counting those missing ballots that have not been counted yet today. We may not have any tallies today. I hope we do. We'll know a lot more at least by tomorrow. And then, as you know, Friday's a holiday, and then Saturday is when we'll probably get final results. But we may know earlier than that whether Catherine Cortez Masto can make up that deficit.
So, Ashley, put your deep analytical hat on. I mean, we always talk about the fact that midterms tend to be a referendum on the sitting president, on the party in charge. Was that the case this time?
Certainly not the way that Democrats worried and Republicans hoped. And I think one other thing we have heard that this result did was you were certainly hearing quietly and even breaking into public this idea that President Biden needs to step aside in 2024 to make way for a new generation of Democratic leadership. And these results, which no matter how they end up, no matter how you cut them, no matter what the expectations game was, were objectively good for Democrats, puts to rest all of those calls. There was quiet rumblings again that if it was sort of a shellacking, as Democrats had expected, you would see more and more Democrats coming out and making the case that new leadership was required. And that is the morning after that is no longer the case. And so President Biden, he's made clear he plans to run in 2024. and it's going to be a decision that he will purely make with his family without a clamoring of people in his own party saying it's time for change.
And meanwhile, Carlos, you were talking about Florida. I mean, DeSantis shattered all expectations in many things. I mean, he got nearly 70% of the Cuban American vote. That's kind of the same he got last time. But he got 55% of the Puerto Rican vote. He got 50% plus of all the other Latinos living and voting in the state of Florida. Is Florida a now all red state, or is it a DeSantis state?
Well, Jose, I think you see the trend in Florida. Of course, the perennial purple state, I think those days are over. Florida is now moving clearly into the Republican column because of the work of Ron DeSantis, not just in terms of governing, but the on-the-ground work. I mean, Florida now has more registered Republicans than Democrats for the first time in a very long time, maybe ever. And I think, the other big explanation there is the Hispanic population. Of course, Cuban Americans have always been reliably Republican, but now you have Puerto Ricans, Central Americans, Colombians also supporting the Republican Party. So this has major consequences for 2024. Florida was always a state that both parties were thinking about how much they were going to invest in. We may not see a major investment by Republicans or Democrats in Florida in 2024.
John Ralston, Ashley Parker, sorry. Go ahead, quickly.
I just think it's very problematic that that is, in fact, the case for the Democratic Party. That's a lot of electoral college votes to take off the table. And the only way to get back in the game in Florida for Democrats is to invest.
But can you do that by 2024?
No.
There you go. Okay, John Ralston, Ashley Parker, thank you. Carlos and Simone, who are fired up along with us, are going to stay with us for the hour. And Steve Kornacki will be back at the big board to break down the biggest outstanding races. But first, the lessons learned after Democrats flipped the Senate seat in Pennsylvania. Now to a marquee win for Democrats in Pennsylvania. We just learned at the top of the hour that a campaign manager for Mehmet Oz told NBC News that he called John Fetterman just minutes ago to concede in their key Senate race. Fetterman won over voters in areas that had provided huge margins to Republicans in previous years.
I never expected that we were going to turn these red counties blue, but we did what we needed to do, and we had that conversation across every one of those counties. And tonight, that's why I'll be the next U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania.
And also, Democrats scoring a second big win in the state with Josh Shapiro defeating Republican candidate Doug Mastriano for governor. Joining us now, NBC's chief White House correspondent, Peter Alexander. Peter, good morning. What are the key takeaways from voters?
Well, Jose, let's be very clear. Both parties had the crucial Senate seat here as one of their top targets, but obviously it is a big win, a big pickup for the Democrats with John Fetterman taking this seat, and a bit more decisively than folks anticipated. We thought it could be several days before we had the results here. Some of the difference makers in this state, look at Scranton, Lackawanna County. That's where Joe Biden's hometown is. John Fetterman actually outperformed Joe Biden in Biden's own hometown. The unconventional style of Fetterman helping with his working class appeal. Obviously, you know him for the hoodie and the shorts. He may have to change that when he finally heads to Washington here. But this was a big win, certainly for the Democrats. And Dr. Oz had been casting himself as a moderate, but I think there's going to be a lot of scrutiny about his decision this past weekend to host a rally with former President Donald Trump here in Pennsylvania. A couple more takeaways from our exit polls. John Fetterman's health had been a question throughout the past several months of the campaign, but 50% of Pennsylvanians said that he was in good enough health to serve as their senator, 47% saying that he was not. And then look at the issues, the drivers in this state. Inflation, well, that wasn't number one. In fact, it was abortion that was the top issue at 36%. Inflation at number two, with crime, gun policy, and immigration way behind. Back to you guys.
Peter Alexander in Philadelphia, thank you so much. You know, Pennsylvania does indeed hold 19 electoral college votes, and it could now be the most valuable battleground state heading into 2024. Back with us, Carlos Curbelo and Simone Sanders-Townsend, host of Simone on MSNBC, a must-watch program. So, Carlos, let's talk about Pennsylvania. What do these losses and wins mean for each party in that state?
Well, for Democrats, and Simone can speak to this, I think that blue wall that's been discussed for so many years, right? Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, those states in the Midwest become even more important because Florida stops being an option. Basically, you have two big blue states now in California and New York, and two big red states in Florida and Texas. So this is a big change. This is different from what we've become accustomed to really since the 2000 election, where Florida was always the deciding state, and Ohio is also a state where I think Democrats are starting to give up on. So the map is starting to become more clear for 2024. I think what remains unclear for 2024 is who's going to be the candidate for each party.
Well, in a way, that leads me to this, because, Simone, there was so much attention on Fetterman Oz. In a way, the governor's race there got a little bit short shrift, right? But then all of a sudden this morning, there's like this buzz. Could Josh Shapiro be a candidate for president? He did say this last night that I thought was interesting. Tonight, we showed how to build a coalition to win a race in a big way. What are the lessons, either from that race or others that you saw, about building a maybe different kind of coalition for Democrats?
So I do think that the work that Josh Shapiro did in Pennsylvania also helped pull John Fetterman over the line. Let's not forget, Pennsylvania was called, the governor's race was called quite early, and it was a Senate race that was a bit of a nail-biter, very similar to what we're seeing in Wisconsin, right? It's very clear that Tony Evers has won, unclear about what is happening in that Senate race. In Pennsylvania, Shapiro helped move Fetterman. I think coalition is important. I think investment. I'm going to keep talking about investment all week because investment matters. This cycle, the DNC gave the Pennsylvania Democratic Party more than $2.1 million. Last midterm cycle, they got like barely $600,000. What they did with the money mattered. The ground game matters here. Investing early in African-American and Latino communities, because there's a large Puerto Rican population in Pennsylvania. The streets don't know, but it is there. And you have to go out there and talk to people. And that is what has happened across the country and why I believe Democrats did well. They ran races for the districts and states that they were in.
Yeah, now, Leo poll just showed that 44% of Latino voters never got any information or reach from any political party. 44%. It is indeed. So, Carlos, stay with us, because still ahead, Steve Kornacki, who I understand just found out that sleep is for others, not for him. He's going to be back with us, and we're going to be going over a bunch of numbers for us. Plus, we're going to go to Georgia, where a high-profile Senate race is too close to call.
It's the morning after an election that has defied expectations, and in some key races, it's left more questions than answers. At this hour, we still don't know who will control the Senate, as races in Arizona, Wisconsin, Nevada, and Georgia remain uncalled. We also don't know who will control the House. But one thing we do know is that outside of Florida, the anticipated red wave did not materialize.
Indeed. We're also following governor's races where there is a little more certainty. Still, several races, including close contests in Nevada and Arizona, are still uncalled. And moments ago, NBC News projected that Kansas Democratic Governor Laura Kelly won her bid for a second term.
Steve Kornacki is at the big board for a closer look at what's going on right now. Steve, what a wild night. How's it looking this morning?
Yeah, what a wild night, continuing into the morning and probably through the day, because as you say, we got a lot of unsettled business here. So let's take a look here first at that battle for the Senate. And so the one big change that's taken place is the Democrats won Pennsylvania. That's a pickup for them, because Pat Toomey, the Republican, had held the seat. He retired. John Fetterman wins it. Democrats pick it up. It means the Republicans, if they're going to emerge with a Senate majority, now have to gain 2 Democratic seats from what's left on the board. Well, what's left on the board? First, you've got a Republican-held seat. Republicans are defending in Wisconsin. Ron Johnson is leading there. I think Republicans are feeling good about his chances of hanging on. It'd be catastrophic for Republicans if he were to lose it at this point. But let's say, for the sake of argument, that Ron Johnson hangs on, Republicans hang on there. Then that would leave 3 Democratic-controlled seats on the map: Georgia, Arizona, Nevada. And Republicans would need to win 2 of these, again, to get control of the Senate. So let's take a quick look inside them. The first thing you see here is in Georgia, where Raphael Warnock is the Democratic incumbent. A lot of the vote, almost all the vote is in, and you see that neither he nor Herschel Walker has crossed the 50% threshold, with the Libertarian getting 2%. That means there's a very distinct possibility of a runoff here in Georgia. In fact, the Secretary of State's office has already said they believe this race is going to a runoff. So if that is the case, then you move to Arizona and to Nevada. The runoff would be on December 6th, and you move to Arizona and Nevada. And for Republicans to have a chance to get control of the Senate, they would then need to win at least one of these two, Arizona or Nevada, then take their shot in the runoff. So take a look in Arizona, what it looks like right now. Mark Kelly, the Democratic incumbent, with an advantage of about 90,000 votes over Blake Masters, the Republican. Just more than 2/3 of the vote has been reported here. This is notably, I think, compare this Senate result right now to the governor's result in Arizona. Carrie Lake, the Republican, also trailing here, but she is much closer. She's down about 11,000 votes. Masters is down nearly 90,000 votes. So the path for Masters is a steeper one here in Arizona. We're going to get an update at 10 p.m. Eastern tonight from Maricopa County, by far the biggest county in the state. It's going to give us, I think, a sense of what the remaining vote looks like. Is it Republican? Is it Democratic? How Republican is it? Is it realistic that Masters would have a chance to catch Kelly in this race? I think we're going to find that out tonight. But obviously, especially when you look at that governor's race where Carrie Lake's only 10,000 votes behind, that's a tough spot for Masters to be in right now. And then you go north here, you look in Nevada, Adam Laxalt, the Republican, is ahead right now. You see by 22,000 votes, but there are still, we don't know the exact number, but in Clark County, it's tens of thousands of mail ballots, drop box ballots yet to be counted. There's probably another 15, 20,000 or so out of Washoe County. This is where Reno is. So there are still a lot of ballots to be counted here, and especially down in Clark, they could be Democratic friendly. There could certainly be enough ballots left for Cortez Masto to catch Laxalt. So the bottom line when it comes to Senate control is this. If Georgia's going to a runoff, if Wisconsin is staying Republican, then Republicans have to win either that Blake Masters race in Arizona or that Adam Laxalt, Catherine Cortez Masto in Nevada. If they lose both of those states, that would be game, set, match. Democrats would hold the Senate no matter what happens in the Georgia runoff. If Republicans can get in Arizona or can get a Nevada, then December 6th, Georgia runoff would be poised to decide control of the U.S. Senate.
Steve, thank you so much. And speaking of Georgia, the Senate race there remains too close to call. According to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, ad spending hovered around $250 million, putting it in contention with Pennsylvania to be the most expensive contest in the nation this cycle. But even after all that spending, we might be heading for a runoff, as Steve was saying, next month. Joining us now from Atlanta is NBC News national correspondent Gabe Gutierrez. Gabe, good morning. Where do things stand there?
Hi, Jose. Good morning. Well, Steve laid it out so nicely. Yes, we're looking at those races out west to see if a runoff here in Georgia next month would essentially be the indicator for the balance of power in the Senate. And yes, no, there's no official winner here in Georgia just yet. But as Steve also mentioned, Georgia's Secretary of State does say that, he believes that we are heading towards a runoff next month. Now, Senator Warnock, he's been saying overnight that his opponent, Herschel Walker, underperformed in many different parts of this state. Both campaigns gearing up for a runoff. And we've been speaking with voters who, frankly, aren't very thrilled that they're going to have to be subjected to another couple weeks of campaigning. This race, as you mentioned, Jose, more than $250 million already flowing to this race. And depending on what happens in Nevada and Arizona, the potential for much more money to come here if it all ends up coming down to the runoff next month. Now, Jose, we should mention the gubernatorial race here in Georgia. Governor Brian Kemp defeating Stacey Abrams for the second time, and there could be split ticket voters there. The vote tally signals that there may have been some Republicans that voted for Brian Kemp but instead chose to vote for the Democrat, Senator Warnock. And we have been speaking with voters here on the ground, some who told me they did end up voting for Herschel Walker, some Republicans, but they did but so reluctantly. So it should be interesting to see how that all plays out. But again, all signs pointing to a possible runoff here in Georgia as those final votes are tabulated. Still no clear winner here. Jose?
I hope you packed enough for December. Thank you so much for that, Gabe Gutierrez. And up next, could Florida get any more red? What sparked last night's Republican sweep?
38 past the hour, Latino voters were pivotal in last night's election. And this morning, we're getting a clear sense of the directions they leaned in battleground areas. Miami-Dade is Florida's largest county with the largest share of Latinos at about 70%. It's projected to go red, voting to support Governor Ron DeSantis by 11 percentage points. That's the first time Miami-Dade has voted for a Republican governor since Jeb Bush in 2002. Meanwhile, there are other counties.
Yeah, if you look at the ones around the border in Texas, which are majority Hispanic, they supported the Democratic challenger for governor, Beto O'Rourke, while the majority of the state went for the incumbent, Greg Abbott. And two closely watched House races in South Texas are projected to go to Democrats Henry Cuellar and Vicente Gonzalez, with the other closely watched race in the border town of McAllen expected to go to the Republican there, Monica De La Cruz.
With us now is NBC's Ali Vitale, former Congressman Carlos Curvedo, and Simone Sanders Townsend, host of Simone, still here with us on MSNBC. So, Ali, what are we seeing unfolding that is, well, it seems as though there is no pattern, right. Of Latino votes?
Yeah, but that's always been true, right, Jose? You and I talk about this a lot. Women are not a monolith. Latinos are not a monolith. Certainly that shouldn't be surprising. Nevertheless, Florida is giving us yet another reminder of why it's important to dig even deeper into the data. And I think it's really important when you look at this state. It is more solidly red than it's ever been in the past. Certainly everyone who's sitting on set next to you can speak to the reasons as to why. It's a lack of Democratic investment, certainly, an atrophying of the state party here, but also sustained Republican investment, especially in places like Miami-Dade County, doing a better job of speaking to Hispanic voters. Now, if you look at the breakdown for someone like Governor Ron DeSantis, he won among Cuban voters roughly the same percentages that he did in 2018, but where he was able to make inroads, and I remember this was an active conversation when I was covering his first gubernatorial race in 2018, when Democrats were much more competitive and the margins here were much tighter. The big question at that point was, where will Puerto Rican voters go? Who will they break for in the state of Florida? And the storyline that we're beginning to see here 4 years later is that it seems that Republicans have done a better job of speaking to Puerto Rican voters, especially those who moved to the state after the hurricane in 2018. That was an open question and one we're getting a little bit of a better answer to here today.
And I want to go back to the Latino vote because it's so critical, but I understand you have some breaking news. Look, one of the races in the House we were looking at so carefully was Sean Patrick Maloney, because he was the guy in charge of getting Democrats elected. Yeah. Tight race. What do we know about it now?
Tight race. Ironically, this is the race in my home district, the area that I grew up. I spent the week before Election Day there talking with Sean Patrick Maloney, also talking with his opponent, Mike Lawler. Lawler there is someone who knows the state well. He's been an operative in New York State well before he got into elected politics. He said that he felt confident that he was going to be the first person in 40 plus years to knock off the man who's the head of the DCCC. And it seems that he may have just done it because Sean Patrick Maloney called him to concede. And this is the culmination, really, of New York State maps shifting so aggressively. And then, of course, the fact that Maloney himself was in a little bit of an intra-party battle as to who would actually be the person in the primary to be the one to run in this district. So there's a lot of, we'll say, Monday morning quarterbacking, although it's a Wednesday here, within Democratic ranks as to what happened with Sean Patrick Maloney in this suburban New York district. But certainly this was one of the key races that we were watching, and we're seeing now maybe no red wave, certainly not, but definitely a big loss for Democrats.
Without a doubt. Thank you for that update. And Simone, let me go to you, because this was a race that for Democrats, obviously the symbolism of it, right? Of the guy who's in charge, not winning. But she touched on something we haven't talked about yet, which is gerrymandering and the impact it has had. And a complicating factor, isn't it, when you're really looking at what are the takeaways from this unexpected better night than expected for Democrats.
I think so. I mean, look, in Ohio, folks were running on maps that were challenged. In Florida, folks were running on maps that Governor DeSantis drew himself, right? And in New York, folks were running on maps that Democrats drew that were crazy. Let me tell you, the Democratic strategists and operatives and people on the ground in New York, it is a problem what happened with these maps. And Sean Patrick Maloney, let me tell you, he ended up in a district that Mondaire Jones was representing, current member of Congress. Sean Patrick Maloney decided to run in the district that Mondaire Jones was in, forced Mondaire Jones out. He went down the road, Mondaire Jones did, to run in a different district. He lost. I said it before and I'll say it again. Sean Patrick Maloney should have led by example and stayed out of that race.
Can I ask you a question? Is it possible that they're, both sides maybe, depending too much on computer models and the micro-targeting of voters as opposed to injecting in it some knowledge of really what's happening on the ground? Or is that not the problem?
No, I think both things can be true, right? But I think, for an example, in the Sean Patrick Maloney race that we're talking about, Mondaire Jones is somebody that knew that district, that was in that district. Sean Patrick Maloney, it was not his district. He got drawn into it, and he didn't know those folks. Mondaire Jones, the current district that it is now, he represents some of those people. And so it's something to be said about running for your district, knowing the voters in your district, and speaking directly to them.
The other factor with some of these members who are in leadership is that sometimes they appear to be detached, and their voters end up resenting that they seem too invested in the inside game in D.C. as opposed to being in their districts. This happened to Eric Cantor, who lost a primary as the House Majority Leader. It happened to Tom Foley in the early 90s, a Democratic speaker. So this does happen sometimes. It's just one seat, but very symbolic.
Ali Vitale has more reporting that we should go on to. Ali.
Yeah, well, and we're going to hear, too, from Sean Patrick Maloney in about half an hour. I know then Lawler's going to speak later in the day. But the D-Trip is also going to be doing a call at, I don't even know what time it is anymore. We've been up forever, but it's 10:45. Around noon, they're going to do a call with Speaker Pelosi, with Maloney on it, and they're going to kind of brief House Democrats on what's happened here in the last 24 hours. I think, though, that Chris makes a really good point with you can't just throw something in the computer and expect the model to spit out what's actually going to happen in reality. Certainly tonight is a really good example of that. And I've been talking to pollsters and strategists who have, over the course of the last 5 years, just been wondering, how do we even model? How do we poll correctly? Because these electorates are shifting so much. But I think in this one, the thing I keep coming back to, as someone who's covered reproductive rights and access for so long, is that when you're in a period that's post-Roe, that has been theoretical and not tested for so long, you can't model against something that you haven't seen for 49 years. And I think that's one of the things that we're seeing here. Not the only trend, but one of the key reasons.
It seems like many times they're surprised, politicians are surprised at redistricting when it's in the books. Every 10 years, this thing happens. And so the fact is that they're using whatever models or computer models, or actually feeling that they can go into a district that maybe they haven't represented like the person who's been representing it there for years. But you know what? Power is important, and so move aside for me, but that's not what the voters want.
It's definitely not what they seem to be saying in Sean Patrick Maloney's new district. I think the point that Ali Vitale just made is really important. We heard for weeks at post-Kansas how Democrats overcalculated on Roe. Abortion is not a kitchen table issue. And if you are a woman, a person with a daughter, a family, a man in this country, it is a kitchen table issue for you. Abortion is an economic issue, and we are seeing that borne out in the data and the votes.
Okay, you guys are staying with us. Ali Vitale, thank you for that breaking news. And again, as she said, DCCC, Sean Patrick Maloney, and Nancy Pelosi are going to be having a phone call coming up at the top of noon. So we'll be watching for that and getting reporting out of that as well. But up next, the red wave that wasn't. The House races we're still watching next. So we told you about Sean Patrick Maloney. Even though we haven't called the race, he has called and conceded the House race. But the battle for control of the House is still too close to call. In a race that both parties viewed as an important early bellwether, Democratic Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger was narrowly reelected to her Virginia House seat, and her Democratic colleague, Congresswoman Elaine Luria, a member of the January 6th committee, lost a close race. And one high-profile race has yet to be called.
In Colorado, firebrand freshman Congresswoman Lauren Boebert is in a tough re-election fight. Look at the numbers. I mean, currently, she's trailing her Democratic opponent by about 1 percentage point. Though the red wave that he promised is yet to materialize nationwide, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy projected confidence last night.
Now, let me tell you, you're out late. But when you wake up tomorrow, we will be in the majority and Nancy Pelosi will be in the minority.
Well, no, it hasn't happened that way as of right now. Back with us now on the set, former Congressman Carlos Curbelo and Simone Sanders Townsend.
I'm so curious. I mean, obviously, the focus is on the races that haven't been called yet, right? But what's happening behind the scenes? What are the party people doing a deep dive on? What are they looking to glean out of these results? Like I look at, say, Abigail Spanberger, and I think, is that a way to look at how to run as a moderate? I mean, what are they looking for right now to give them some insights?
I think folks are first looking for what the turnout was, right? In which areas, what were the numbers for women, what were the numbers for young people? Important to note that young people seem to be a real deciding factor in a number of these races across the country that broke for Democrats. Very important. Let's dig in there. What did we do there? What are the numbers for African Americans and Latinos? We've been talking about Latino voters, but also Abigail Spanberger's race is an interesting race where crime was where crime was one of the main issues that ads were ran on. She was up against a very well-funded, competitive opponent, and she won out. Okay, so does that bore out for the rest of the country? What is really happening there? I think lots of conversations, things we won't know right now today.
Does it seem as though we've entered in a time in our country's history where all of the expectations, polls, experts, and analysis ends up being wrong?
Down is up, up
We
is
talked
down.
about this last night.
But I'm just, it's like, it's already, is the pattern this now?
It seems like it, Jose. At the end of the day, we got all these polling. Everyone talked about immigration and inflation and crime and abortion. And sure, all the issues factored. But I think what people didn't expect was what these ticket splitters did all over the country.
Right.
Punishing Republicans who lied about the election and who embraced Donald Trump's lie about 2020. I think as Steve Kornacki keeps digging into these numbers throughout the week, that's going to become a very interesting point to analyze, because that's something that I don't think people saw coming. And by the way, you asked Chris, what are people saying inside the parties? Republicans are once again pondering, guess what to do about Donald Trump and whether to follow Donald Trump, and if so, to where. It doesn't seem like Donald Trump ends in a very good place.
Does the line start today? You either come down as a Republican on the side of Donald Trump or on the side of not Donald Trump.
This is what Republicans are saying quietly, as most things they say about Donald Trump are said quietly. The question is if in the coming days some will start publicly questioning the party.
So?
I think it's going to happen. Certainly, people like Mitch McConnell have done it for some time now, and Mitch McConnell was proven right. He talked about candidate quality 6 weeks ago. A couple weeks ago, everyone thought he was crazy and Republicans were going to end up with 54 seats. Guess what? Candidate quality, meaning the candidates that Donald Trump supported, were a big problem for Republicans last night.
And extremism is not popular, okay? Running against the kind of conversation we've been having about abortion in this country, potentially jailing doctors, jailing women, fining folks. Dr. Oz, Mehmet Oz, talking about politicians should be able to make the decisions with women and their doctors. That is extremism that nobody likes, not Democrats, not Republicans, nor independents. And those are the numbers that we are seeing bore out.
So do you think that what happens next Tuesday when Donald Trump apparently announces for the presidency, will that in a way kind of decide for President Biden what his future is?
Look, I think that President Biden has been very clear that he intends to run for president. I think, obviously, this showing today or last night, again, we don't know. Republicans could, at this point, still win the House, but we don't know. But I do think that President Biden is emboldened, as he should be. Look at the numbers.
And if Republicans do win, it's a very different House that, frankly, Kevin McCarthy's going to be leading.
Well, and what to look for on the Republican side is the Cold War between Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump will now become a hot war. And also, if this comes down to Georgia, does Herschel Walker welcome Donald Trump to campaign with him or not?
Carlos.
Doesn't seem like it would make a lot of sense.
It leaves us with a provocative thought. Carlos and Simone, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
That's going to do it for us this hour. So stay with us for live election results and up-to-the-minute reports. We're back right after a short break.